Welcome everyone to today's IceWarm webinar on livable and resilient cities. I'm looking forward to this with great interest. My name's Trevor Pillar, National Partnerships Manager, and we're so glad that so many have joined us. I'm looking at the screen right now and it's all over the place. You can see it there now. That map shows what is actually happening here. This is terrific to see so many here. I think we're going to have a very good discussion, and we're so glad Bruce Neumann can join us and present his great work and others, his team out there at City of Salisbury in Salisbury Water. Right into today's presentation from Bruce. He's a manager of Salisbury Water at the City of Salisbury, has been so for many years, and follows a long line of engineers and environmentalists who have made Salisbury Council come alive in terms of livability and resilience. It's a dry council, but leads the world in this whole area of water reuse, and water, not just reuse. I won't keep using that word. Bruce will explain how the 63 Mar wells and 600 community and commercial customers have fit for purpose water. We're so delighted, Bruce, that you can join us today, and I'll hand right over to you now. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Trevor. Yes, welcome everyone. I'm really pleased to be able to present today on behalf of the team out here at the City of Salisbury. So I lead a small bunch of very dedicated staff who manage the wetlands and the water recycling business. And we do actually run it as a business to maximise the benefit that we can deliver to our community. So yes, that's just a quick snapshot of one of our wetlands there, the Greenfields Wetlands and the Watershed Urban Sustainability Centre in the background. We have some 70 constructed wetlands right across the City of Salisbury, and I'll just be taking through a little bit of what we do out here and how we hope to build a more resilient and livable city for our residents. So just a little bit of background. Adelaide, down here in South Australia. As you can see, we average about 450 to 460 millimetres of rainfall per year. So that's less than 18 inches of rainfall each year. So we are extremely dry. And that presents a lot of challenges for us. And I think it has helped shape the attitude of water in South Australia, that every drop of water is precious. So just zooming in a little bit on where we are, this is Adelaide, and the City of Salisbury is out in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. So effectively about 10% of the total population of Adelaide reside in the Salisbury area. And so we're talking about this green area on your map. And we have 3 natural watercourses that traverse Salisbury. So we have Adams Creek, Little Parra River, and Dry Creek. Just looking a little bit of detail there, the watercourses that are finding their way down to the marine environment and the Barker Inlet. So for Adelaide people and South Australians in general, the Barker Inlet is a very precious marine environment. So you can see the inlet, mangroves. It's a very important breeding area for many of our aquatic species, but in particular the King George whiting, which is one of our tastier fish. And if you're ever down in Adelaide, it's certainly well worth trying. But so very sensitive marine environment, and our urban stormwater all discharges into that environment. And so some 40 odd years ago, or in fact maybe closer to 50, as John Radcliffe has outlined in his excellent article that he did on us, so it's 50 years of water sensitive urban design in Salisbury, so well worth a read if you get a chance. What we've effectively been able to do over the last 50 years is build a network of wetlands that intercept every bit of urban runoff before it actually reaches that Barker Inlet. And so we've got schemes built all the way down each of those watercourses. And what we try to do is intercept as much of that rainfall or that stormwater as possible, treating it up in the wetlands. And they are all constructed wetlands, so they're not natural wetlands. They've all been built for the specific purpose of cleansing the water before it hits the Barker Inlet. So around about 20 years ago, people started to realise that these wetlands, the network of wetlands, was doing an incredible job of cleaning up the water And so that's when they started thinking about what can we do with that water. And at the same time, of course, the Adelaide's drinking water supply, a very good quality supply provided by the state utility, SA Water, but it was starting to get too expensive, and people were questioning why we were using good quality drinking water to keep our open space green. And of course, for local government, it was becoming extremely expensive. And so that's what drove that investigation into what could we do with that excess stormwater from our wetlands. And so that's when we started to investigate how we could harvest it and store it and then distribute it. And so what we now have at each of those nodes, so the red nodes on the map are where we actually cleanse and harvest the stormwater. We store it in the underground aquifers, the natural sandy limestone aquifers below our feet, and then we distribute it via our own purple pipe network. Now, the interesting thing about our purple pipe network is it's not like SA Waters, it's not a constantly pressurised pipeline, we're a distributed network. So we have 9 major pump stations, and they're only supplying their local areas. So we're trying to supply the schools and the sporting reserves and industry in proximity to each of those pump stations. But what we found in the millennial drought was that we needed to back our systems up. It's a little bit like having a rainwater tank on your property at home. It doesn't take long, a few weeks of dry weather, and that rainwater tank has run dry. And so you do need, with stormwater harvesting, you did need to be able to back your systems up. And so each of our systems can actually interconnect with their neighbour. And that's become very important to us just recently, where we've unfortunately been caught up with the PFAS business. And this up here in the north is a fairly large defence establishment that is having problems with PFAS contamination of groundwater. And we've had to actually quarantine 2 of our major schemes here. And fortunately, we've been able to bring it around our network from the neighbours. So from the eastern side, site 11, and from the western side, site 6, we've been able to cover all of our customers. So that was a pretty big hit to us, but we've been able to limp by. We haven't lost a single customer, and that's quite important to us. We can move as much as 10 million litres per night during peak irrigation season. So it was a pretty big ask, and we've managed to get by and not lose a single customer. Okay, so just a quick recap. Salisbury Water, our small water utility or water business, if you like, we specialise in harvesting the stormwater runoff from the urban catchment. We clean it up in constructed wetlands and biofilters. We have a number of reasonably large biofilters that treat the stormwater to meet the strict EPA quality criteria before we can inject it into our aquifers. So we're storing, we are very fortunate to have good confined aquifers, and that does give us a big advantage, and we acknowledge that. And that enables us to store the very large volume. So we store typically 4 to 5 gigalitres or 4 to 5,000 million litres of water per year. And then we can pull it out in the long dry summers. And for Adelaide, that can sometimes be 12 to 14 weeks through summer where we don't get a single drop of rainfall. So we do tend to have a very long dry summer, and so that storage is critically important for us. We're also starting to get right into wastewater. So it's a little bit circular economy, I guess, and we've already started with one customer where the water that we supply to him, we actually take his wastewater back again, clean it up and sell it on to the next customer. And we're about to take another very big step in that area, where one of our biggest industrial customers that we supply over 1 million litres of water per day to them, we will be taking their wastewater back, and the aim is to put it into a energy recovery plant, so an anaerobic digestion plant to recover energy. We will then be taking the digestate from that AD plant, blending it with more of our stormwater and providing it to farmers in the area. So it's a really good example of a circular economy. The other thing we do, of course, is provide tours for the public. So quite a number of school groups and general public like to come to our wetlands, and we would have several thousand visitors per year that we take on guided tours through the wetlands and educate them on what our sustainability initiatives are all about. Just for those of you who are not familiar with the aquifer, this is just a very simple schematic. So For us, it's actually on our eastern side in the hills, or we refer to it as the escarpment. We're actually capturing the stormwater. There's a lot of natural recharge in our hills area, and that's due to the nature of the geological structures up there. It typically is fractured rock. The water penetrates quite readily on that eastern escarpment and naturally sustains our aquifers. However, most of our urban water, those 70 wetlands that I mentioned earlier, we're intercepting in basins, and the first stage of our wetlands is always a sedimentation basin, and then we get into the open water bodies. And so it's that treatment train, and typically can take 10 to 15 days to get the water quality to meet EPA standards. And once we've got to that standard, we're then injecting into the natural sandy limestone aquifers. So that's a very simplified description of what we do. So the current state, we're operating 63 wells now, and it's not just stormwater recharge. So only 31 of our wells are actually dedicated to the technique of aquifer storage and recovery. So ASR is what we refer to as the system where we put the water into the same well that we extract from. So it goes in and out of the same well. We were practicing ASTR, aquifer storage, transfer and recovery, where we would inject in a set of wells and allow the water to percolate through the aquifer and extract. And we also operate simple extraction wells where we actually trade the credit, so the actual the license credit that we get for injecting. And the resource manager here in South Australia, the Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources, they encourage us to inject in areas where the aquifer is stressed. So where, say, market gardeners or industry have over-extracted, we will inject to bring those native groundwater levels back up to the natural level. And in return, we get 80% of that injection credit that we can transfer to our own community extraction wells. And that saves a small fortune on having purple pipe crisscrossing the city. We can actually put our well right next to a school or next to a sporting field and provide the irrigation water. We have, however, built over the last 10 years a network of 150 kilometres of purple pipe, and 90% of that has actually been laid by directional drilling techniques, so horizontal directional boring. And typically our pipe sizes, we don't get into really large pipe sizes, but most of our network is 280 millimetres, so slightly smaller than, say, a 12-inch diameter. And that's because up to that size, it's still quite cost effective to do the directional drilling technique. Once we get beyond that size, it actually gets quite expensive, and open trenching techniques are more affordable. And we estimate we've crossed over 40,000 driveways. So the actual driveways of private residences, and we've managed to crack one driveway in that 40,000. And I'm pretty sure that one was already cracked before we actually went through, but anyway, we compensated that chap. So we're supplying 38 of our local schools, over 136 community and sporting facilities. Now, we do things a little bit differently here because we're a lower socio-economic community. Council actually run all of the sports fields. So we actually do the maintenance, the irrigation, we service and look after the clubhouses and so forth. And then the actual community clubs pay a nominal rent back to council for that service. So our water is actually bundled up in that service rent. And what we're targeting is commercial users at the moment. So we're really trying to get into as many commercial users as possible. And the reason is that we've got $50 million worth of asset, and it's being utilised fully in these hot, dry summer nights. So we're putting out 8 to 10 million litres per night. But most of that infrastructure is sitting there doing not a great deal during the day. So we're really looking for customers 24/7 that we can actually get better utilisation of our infrastructure. So what makes a livable and resilient city? And that's what I think we want to focus on in the presentation today. So this is just what I believe what is the key to a livable and resilient city. And first and foremost is flood protection. We must address flood protection for all of our residents, and that's enshrined in legislation, so that is our key priority. we believe that every time you do a flood mitigation project, you can create habitat, you can create biodiversity, whether it's a corridor or within our wetland reserves, then we can create that as part of a holistic approach. And obviously, pollution prevention is absolutely crucial to us in terms of protecting that receiving environment, because that's what the people value. People in Adelaide, of course, love that marine environment. They're down in the sea every weekend. They're fishing, they're surfing. That is a very high priority for Adelaide's residents, and so that pollution prevention is a very key task for us. From an economic point of view, of course, reducing dependence on imported water. So as I mentioned earlier, SA Water, our state utility, does an excellent job of bringing in very high quality drinking water. And they also provide excellent wastewater services. But it comes at a cost. And the simple question is, can we continue to use that high quality, expensive drinking water to keep our suburbs green? And that's what has driven a lot of what we've done out here, getting that cheaper water so that we can keep the suburbs green, that we can have playing fields that the kids can play on. So yeah, driving that whole development of sustainable alternative water resources. Again, wastewater, huge opportunities there for wastewater, and SA Water obviously are doing a lot of work with the recycled wastewater. But we believe there's a lot that can be done with the industrial wastewaters, and in particular our food industry. They're fairly large water users, and the wastewater is often not that contaminated. It doesn't need high levels of treatment before it can be made ready for the next use. Big one, of course, for us, jobs. You know, we weren't the home of GM Holden, but certainly all of the supplier precinct, all of the component manufacturers that supplied GM Holden with their parts, they were located in Salisbury. And the huge assembly plant that has only just recently been closed was right on our doorstep. And so job creation, or just simply sustaining existing jobs, is extremely important for us at the moment. And we believe water will underpin much of the development. So whether it's just in growing food or food processing, it's going to be a very important area of future jobs for people in Adelaide. Obviously, all of this has to be underpinned by innovation, R&D. And I think that's one of the messages that hasn't gotten out clearly. Everything that we've done out here at Salisbury has been underpinned by some excellent R&D. All three universities, but in particular, I'll note the University of SA has been heavily involved, but so has Flinders and Adelaide University. And the CSIRO has played a huge part in helping us establish these systems. Social aspect, of course, for a resilient city, it's that amenity. People are really looking to have a pleasant place to live and work. And I think that we've been able to achieve that out here. I moved into Salisbury some 20 years ago, and really I'd come down from Queensland, and in contrast to Queensland, of course, the Northern Adelaide Plains were a very dry and dusty environment. It was quite a shock. And I think over the last 20 years, Salisbury has really managed to transform itself from that dry, dusty plain to a very pleasant place to live. And people are choosing to live here because it is a clean and pleasant environment. Recreational opportunities, I mean, fitness and health, it's such a crucial thing for our communities to have good recreational facilities. And that's why we plough millions of dollars into those 150 odd reserves that we maintain for our residents. And the interesting thing is that our savings last year were close to $3.5 million. So in terms of just water cost alone, if we were having to use that high quality drinking water for all of our irrigation, it would be costing us close to $3.5 million more than we currently spend. And of course, the other big aspect for a livable and resilient city is getting your community involved, getting the engagement from everyone. And there's a number of ways that we do it. We have an excellent project going on at the moment, supported by the South Australian EPA, which is engaging with the Ghana Indigenous tribe and getting them involved in the construction and maintenance of rain gardens. And so that's helping the EPA achieve its goals for cleaner seas. So they have their water quality improvement program. And we're playing our part in supporting that, but also getting the involvement and engagement of Ghana youth. All right, now I might just speed up a little bit. What I was going to share now is just quickly one of our schemes, because a lot of people mentioned to us that, hey, we can't do this stuff that you've done at Salisbury because we just don't have the space. And it's interesting, I've been to a lot of cities, a lot more urban cities that are a lot denser, the urban density greater than Salisbury, but interestingly, it's amazing how much space there really is when you get into these cities. And one of the key things that we've found about stormwater harvesting is that you don't have to do everything on the one spot. And so our Unity Park project at Paraka was set out to do that, where we actually harvest from a considerable distance away from where we actually do the storage and distribution. So it's basically trying to grab whatever free land we could and put different elements in. And so our harvest site is in the suburban area on Dry Creek. We actually transfer it in two ways. We transfer it from a weir on Dry Creek and from a pump station down in the suburbs to our sedimentation basin. And the sedimentation basin is located in a very nice little park that has a skate park and a playground and a dog park and all sorts of great little community park. And we've been able to help landscape that and keep it green for the young people. From that sedimentation basin, and we've actually already set up a note for future use from State Sports Park, which I believe has just been announced will become the new headquarters for the football, for, as we call it, soccer in South Australia. But from that sedimentation pond, we distribute to a set of biocells and also to twin wetlands. And when I talk about biofiltration cells, they're typically the size of a swimming pool. So we've got about 11 of those, about the size of an Olympic swimming pool. And they're a much more efficient, if you like, efficient use of space. So if you're really tight for space, typically the footprint of a biofilter is about a third of what you would need for a constructed wetland to get the same water quality. And then from those cleansing sites, we actually transfer the water several kilometres through a light industrial area. So we're actually pumping it underneath the industry and across to a road reserve. And in this case, it's Montague Road next to our Mawson Lakes suburb. And we put our well fields, so 9 MAR wells along the road reserve. And then from those wells, when we recover the water, we actually bring it back to the back of a factory. And we actually asked the factory if we could clean up their backyard. So it's like a lot of factories, they tend to have quite junkyards, if you like, or graveyards, some of them call it. And we went in there and we actually offered to clean it up and then purchased half the site off them and built our tanks and distribution pumping station in the back of their factory. And then, of course, from that pumping station, we distribute back into our citywide network that loops around the city, providing the water back to our residents in summer. So that's just a very interesting, a different way that you can approach stormwater harvesting there. The biocell or biofiltration cell, again, a lot of people are putting them on street curbs. I'm not a big fan of that. I think I'm quite happy to start talking about that, but the simple fact is they're taking up usable space. The community doesn't really appreciate them. And to be honest, they're not at a scale. One of the big lessons that we've learned is that you need to get to a certain scale to make this cost effective. And if you're not cost effective, I would suggest the accountants will be looking pretty closely at what you're doing down the track. So we've always taken this very strict business approach, made sure we've had really solid business cases before we invest any money. And the comment I would make is don't be afraid of pipes and entry pits. They're actually a lot easier to keep clean on the streets. So if you're really needing to keep your streets clean, then your side entry pit and your pits and pipes is a much better approach. Get your water away to somewhere where you can actually build a decent sized treatment facility and get a little bit of scale into your process. All right. Obviously, we also have the bigger schemes. Yes, we have the luxury of having airports. We have a defence base that we rent land from. We have a training airport in this case where we rent land from them. And we've been able to build fairly large constructed wetlands. And then, of course, our MAR wells, that's just a typical MAR well. And you can put them anywhere. They really only take up 2 or 3 square metres of space. And that's your storage reservoir. So you're not taking up masses of land, especially in the urban area where you've got the expensive land. Very compact, can be fitted anywhere. Obviously, we've had the luxury of coming in late, being built in the last 10 years. We're highly automated, and we can get a way of running our system with three operators. So we have 3 operators who rotate, and they are on call 24/7. And with the beauty of computing, they can log on to the internet and basically access, start and stop all of our pumps, open and shut valves, and so forth. So yes, we have the luxury of being highly automated, which has helped keep our costs down. Rigor, just a quick shot. Quality, extremely important. We have a very rigorous QA program. So we not only have a lot of online instrumentation, so the pH and EC that's being monitored online, but every 50 megalitres injected, we're sampling and sending them into the Australian Water Quality Labs, so SA Water's water quality labs in the city. And that's a crucial part of what we do. Just a couple of other quick little ones. We tend to try and focus on subsurface irrigation wherever possible to keep down irrigation rates. If it's surface irrigation of turf, then it's nighttime irrigation only. And ornamental lakes. We have a lot of ornamental lakes and water features through some of our newer suburbs. It's the trend. Developers love to put them in there. People love to pay much higher prices for houses that are next to an ornamental lake. And we actually don't use our recycled water, and we don't use the SA Water's recycled water. We only use native groundwater to fill up those lakes via the trading mechanism that I mentioned earlier. So where we've injected elsewhere and then pulled out native groundwater. And of course, then the other big issue, in-house supply. Yes, we do provide in-house, but we prefer not to. We do sell water to SA Water, and we do sell a lot of water to the Water Utilities Australia, who supply into the Lights View housing development in Adelaide. So our water is going into several thousand houses for toilet flushing. And that, of course, introduces a whole new aspect. If I had my time again, I would recommend not to go in-house. I think our water is far too valuable to be actually being wasted flushing toilets. In terms of the benefit that it can deliver to the community, I think it should have been all going for greening of our open space and for industrial use. The issues involved in getting into houses, and it's purely that risk. The risk of having somebody make an accidental cross connection is huge, and that has driven a lot of cost. It's actually added a lot of cost to our schemes that probably wasn't necessary. So that's just an interesting comment. Anyway, thank you very much. I might just have a look at these questions now.
No, that's great. That was an excellent presentation. Much appreciated, Bruce. We covered a lot of ground in a very short space of time, and you did it expertly. That's excellent. So look, we'll get straight into this. By all means, stick your hand up, and we'll upraise you to a full living colour on-screen discussion, which we'd love. You know, I'm not just. I want to happen. That'd be really good. But there's a ton of questions here in the meantime, so we'll get started. Look, the one here from Dr. Joan van der Zoom and Tim Kirby, both from CSIRO. Thanks for a really interesting presentation, Bruce. It's amazing to see what you've been able to achieve. I'm not sure if you'd be willing to share, but if you are, I was wondering if there was anything you would change with respect to stormwater management if you had your time all over again.
No, I think we've made our mistakes along the way, Trevor, but I don't think I'd change too much. I think we found a pretty good way of doing things. But one of the interesting things that I would change, I mentioned our investment in the SCADA system, the fancy electronics. That's probably our weak link, actually. And I would invest in an extra couple of operators, actually, a couple more staff, and a bit more hands-on than the actual automation.
So managing the data and monitoring.
Yes,
automated.
and I think it's something that I worry a little bit about, where councils are launching into putting these high-tech sensors on rubbish bins and so forth. And
Yeah.
the reality is you do need to have eyes on sometimes.
Yep, no, that's excellent. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Joe, for that question. Now we have Brett Pearson from Australian Groundwater Technologies on the line. So over to you, Brett.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me.
Yep,
Bruce.
bit louder. Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in the cost associated with your ASR water, with your water from your ASR schemes. Have you done an estimate as to how much it costs per kilolitre to produce that water?
Yes, well, we're governed by the Water Industry Act, and so our price setting is actually scrutinised by ESCOSA, so the Essential Services Commission of South Australia. So we have to calculate our prices the same as SA Water does for their drinking water, and so our full price is $2.61 per kilolitre at the moment, but that has to cover a lot of things, and it has to cover the sins of a number of what I would call legacy projects, where very early contracts were established at ridiculously low prices, and we do have to honour those. But yes, our long run marginal cost is up there around the $2.50 mark, if you like.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no, thanks a lot, Brett. That's great. We have another one from Basant Maheshwari from University of Western Sydney. Basant was saying, very interesting presentation, thank you. Do you monitor groundwater levels to assess the performance of recharge activities? Also, how do you use this information?
Yes. So certainly with our injection wells, we generally have observation wells. So if we're, say, injecting into the tertiary 2 aquifer, we will generally have observation wells in both the T1 and T2 aquifers to observe if there's any, say, cross connections. So the T1, you're obviously looking to see if there's any leakage between the aquifers. Just keeping tabs on it. So we certainly graph it. So we get an enormous amount of data from our SCADA, and that's one of the advantages. You've got a lot of data there that you can consolidate and graph and keep tabs on. And that does actually then influence our decisions on which wells we will select for injection. So we're looking at, obviously for energy saving, we're not going to start injecting in wells that are already artesian. So we do keep fairly close tabs on the groundwater levels.
Yep, no, that's great. Thanks a lot, Basant. Professor Jörg Keller from UQ is saying, are there also private and commercial users accessing the aquifers, or is this done solely by Salisbury Water?
There certainly are, but that's one of the things that we were very careful about, is that we specifically target areas where people aren't using it. So generally we will actually inject into quite brackish aquifers where we know that people aren't typically going to be using it. So we stay well away from areas that have good natural recharge. And I think I mentioned earlier, we have the 33 community bores where we have actually got very good natural recharge, so they're quite sustainable. Certainly we would never go anywhere near those wells for injection. So it's just one of those securities. We focus on the brackish aquifer, and it tends to improve the recovery efficiency. So the more brackish the actual native groundwater that we're injecting into, the denser the water, and so you don't get quite as much blending of the fresh water and the native groundwater. So your actual recovery efficiencies, and we can get typically between 80 and 85% recovery efficiency from some of our MAR wells.
That sounds really good. Craig Flavel is from Australian Water Environments. Can you value the water's contribution to landscape amenity in, say, dollars per kilolitre or dollars per hectare terms? It's a short question, but a good one.
No, but Craig, I'd be really interested in you giving me a proposal on how you might do it. Look, it's one of the challenges for us is actually communicating that to our elected members and our community as to the value of the water. And we're very lucky in that our elected members are right on board, and they love what we're doing, and in fact they encourage it. We're constantly saying to them that, hey, the business case doesn't work, but they'll say, yes, no, there's a social benefit, there's a community benefit. Let's roll out the purple pipe. And that because we've targeted the big users, so we've targeted all of our big sports grounds where we could get a quick payback. But we've got 150 odd small playgrounds, which it just doesn't make sense on a purely economic basis. But our local members are saying, hey, we want it. We want the purple pipe. We don't want to just switch back on the mains water. That's going against what we started out to do. And so they have actually funded. So rather than my business unit funding it, the council is actually funding it for social reasons.
And maybe you'll take it up further with Craig as time goes by. There's a ton of questions happening, and Professor Jörg is on screen now. Thanks for joining us, Jörg. I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thanks, Bruce. That's very interesting indeed, and thanks for answering the other question around the access from other users. I was just intrigued by that last question as well, and indeed we're, as you may be aware, but we're actually, as part of the work in the Water Sensitive City CRC, we're actually looking at those non-market value benefits of water users for all sorts of applications, and in particular, and maybe, I don't know whether you've done any work in that space. I mean, the value for landscape and amenity value and so on, that's a tricky one in its own right. But have you actually considered and looked at the value in terms of cooling effects? Because ultimately, open water courses are certainly the coolest bits of areas or cities that you can get when you have a heat wave, particularly. But even irrigated grass is actually really good. And what sort of studies or knowledge is there that you could share that we could actually maybe incorporate in some of the work, and we'll maybe be able to pick it up further from here?
Yes, excellent question. Thanks, Jörg. Look, I would probably dub my good colleague Greg Ingleton from SA Water in on that one. Greg's doing some excellent work down at Adelaide Airport, so irrigating turf areas to try and demonstrate the cooling effect. So I think we haven't gone that far in terms of measuring it and getting the effect. So we're relying on people like SA Water to deliver us some of these good numbers. But I must admit, it has been one of our little frustrations, and we've spoken to the research guys about it. We would love to get something that's a little bit more defined. So when you're talking about these externalities and the benefits, it needs to be expressed in the black and white numbers that our decision makers need. And the simple fact is, local government, we're under pressure. We've got people proposing to cap our rates, which has been traditionally the main source of income. There's a lot of demand, a lot of service that we have to deliver. And so when you're trying to compete for funding against a lot of other priorities, you really have to be able to talk the language of the decision makers, and the decision makers are generally from that finance, economic type background. And so we really have to learn to express these benefits that are a little bit warm and fuzzy, but we can't keep coming up with these soft statements. They have to be expressed in hard economic numbers. And then we have to have justifiable research, like good, robust research that justifies the numbers we use.
Yeah, that's great. Can you stay on the line, Jörg? Maybe we'll come back to that again. But Dr. John Radcliffe, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'll hand across to you, John, for a comment or a question.
Thank you. Bruce, there's a lot of interest in the whole nexus between water and energy. You haven't said very much about the energy system that you are using, where it comes from, and how you manage the costs. Now, 10 years ago, everybody was concerned about, the crisis in water. Now they're concerned about the crisis in energy. So do you have any comment on the energy issues?
We did a study with the CSIRO some time back, and our embodied energy is about 80% of what the mains water delivery is, and that's excluding desalination. So if you're not including desalination, then we are typically 80%. Unfortunately, we do still have high energy costs, so we're pushing the water into the aquifer, and there's the extraction that actually costs us more to put it in the aquifer than pull it out. Obviously, that distribution cost is high. Our most recent project, we've just put 2.4 million litres of storage tanks on our escarpment. So that's at an elevation of 119 metres, so that we can actually just pump during off-peak tariff periods. So we run our bore pumps and our distribution pumps during the off-peak periods, fill those tanks, and the elevation of those tanks gives us the pressure through the high demand period at night. So that's one of the projects we just finished. Obviously, the aim is that we'll be moving towards solar PV. Solar PV doesn't quite meet our business rules just yet. but it's not that far off. And so we're fortunate that we can store our energy so in a cost-effective manner. So we believe our elevated storage tanks are around about a third of the cost of chemical storage, so battery storage at the moment. But obviously batteries are going to come down quite rapidly as well. But look, solar PV is right on the cusp for us, around about a 6-year payback. And so we may make the decision to go with solar PV anyway because it's starting to get so close. The other one, really interesting one for us, is that the state government has just announced that they have partnered with an anaerobic digester proposal for Salisbury, and so we will be playing a part in the establishment of a fairly large AD plant that's looking at putting 15 megawatts of dispatchable energy into the grid out in our area. So yeah, certainly we're looking at alternative energy options to power our systems.
Any further comment, John or Jörg?
Well, I think it shows how much the technology is changing and the options are changing just within the last few years, and how if you're running the sort of business that Bruce has initially been involved with, you've got to be pretty nimble, if that's a fashionable word, to keep up with these new opportunities.
Yeah, no, great comment. That's absolutely right, the way energy is going at the moment. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Other comments around that, Jörg or John? And we'll move on to the next question. Otherwise, all good. All right. Well, I've got one here from Adam Sincock. By all means, Jörg and John, we'd love you. Jörg and John, we'd love you to stay online. Adam Sincock is from the Department of Agriculture. The foundation of all this in Salisbury began presumably when the region was open greenfield. How can it be achieved in the existing towns and suburbs?
I guess it's one of those things that I've mentioned. It's amazing how much open space there is when you really start looking at it. And I know, look, Salisbury has that advantage. We started early, and our elected members had that vision 40 or 50 years ago to actually start purchasing land on the watercourse corridors. But there is opportunities there, and that's what I would encourage people to do, is not necessarily look at doing things on the street scale. You got to look in behind the streets. There's buffer zones. There's old factory sites. It's quite amazing how much land you've got when you're really looking into it. And you don't need huge spaces. You don't need to put everything, all the elements on the same spot. Really, the only thing that probably will catch a lot of people out is the storage. And I concede that Salisbury's success is based on the fact that we had ideal confined aquifers. That has been a very big part of our success. But the different storage technologies that are out there at the moment, their prices are coming down all the time. So there is that opportunity to look at storage, alternative storage methods. And the one that I really like is rainwater harvesting. And I know a lot of people are looking at it, but it's that ability to use modern technology, the communication technologies, to link rainwater tanks, so have that distributed storage right across the catchment. I think that's where a number of parties are looking at it, but we could make some really big gains there by having that management and control of distributed storage.
That's certainly the way energy is going. So I can see how you're thinking there, to have the distributed storage. The issue of geology you raised just then, I'm just picking it up because it obviously means that not every region is going to have the opportunity to do what's being done out at Salisbury.
No, and that's certainly not the actual managed aquifer recharge side.
So what are the limitations? What are the limitations around that?
Have that opportunity. That's right. Absolutely. But again, interestingly, when you get right into it, the plastic pipe is very cheap. The ability to put plastic pipe through your suburbs, if you can do it by linking areas, get your storage into areas and distribute back, I think that's an important aspect of it. But it really stormwater. It's not an easy game to play. So even for us, with the natural advantages we've got, it's a lot of hard work.
Yep. The comments, Jörg?
It's not an easy solution, but it's well worth it in the end.
Yep. Look, I think we'll just keep moving on here. Tim Kirby from Tonkin Consulting is saying, what is the latest on ASTR, Aquifer Storage, Transfer and Recovery, to provide even better water quality treatment within the aquifer system?
The research work with the CSIRO has stopped several years ago, and we actually converted the trial site, the ASTR trial site, into eight ASR wells, simply because it's more cost effective for us to run the wells as ASR. So in terms of managing your wells, the constant cycle of putting water in and pulling them out actually has a number of economies for us. When you're running an ASTR site, you do have to put a lot more effort into the actual backflushing of the injection wells, and of course we're not targeting that premium water quality aspect at this stage. Now that may change in the near future, and certainly as we try to focus on getting more industrial customers, and certainly food processing companies are the guys that use water. So automotive and electronics and defence don't tend to use a great deal of water, but certainly food processors do, and where we need that premium quality of water, we may revisit ASTR.
Yep, that sounds good. Oh, look, I think we might draw it to a close here. We've been going 40, 50 minutes. Are there any closing comments from either yourself, Jörg, or John, in terms of the whole thing? All good? Then, yep, sorry, go, Jörg, yours.
Yeah, just a quick question or sort of comment in regards to those industrial customers, and you mentioned a couple of times the food and beverage industry, I suppose, is a key group. Have you talked with them as to why they wouldn't do it themselves, or where you could do it better, or whatever? Because I know there's several large-scale industrial water recycling schemes that run on themselves, as in they're just producing their own recycled water and then they use it back in the production or whatever. Have you talked with them, and where are the advantages of actually doing it through the sort of semi-centralized solution as you've got it, as opposed to them doing it just themselves?
We've had discussions with a number of people on that, and certainly most of them start out wanting to do it themselves, and we certainly try to explain the economies of scale that are involved. And the Department of Defence, for instance, really tried to do their own thing on the airbase, and despite our explaining to them in detail and also to their professional consultants, and that it just wasn't going to be practical for them. They just would never be able to get the economy of scale. They went ahead and did it, and it's subsequently failed. And I think the issue with industry is that most of them are simply too focused on what their job is. So, they've got a job to produce a product, and that's what their people are focused on. Look, they could do it themselves. And we're talking to a number where we are looking at actually just putting groundwater bores next to them, and they might just desalinate it themselves. And in which case, then we're looking at what do they do with the brine. So we've actually been working with UniSA on looking at the brine disposal options. So look, we're not against that if they want to run it themselves. But for most of our businesses, they're landlocked, and so then brine disposal then becomes an issue for them.
Yep.
But yeah, look, we're quite flexible. But at the end of the day, you do need a little bit of scale to get the economies.
Yeah. Look, this has been an absolutely fantastic 55 minutes, and thanks so much for your time, Bruce, but also yours, Jürgen and John, and others who've asked questions. I really appreciate your time on this. The one thing in my life is to get me up in the morning is that I speak to the best in water management, and that is puts a smile on my face, I can tell you that. Thank you so much for your efforts today, gentlemen, and particularly for everyone that attended. It's been a huge attendance today, and we appreciate your questions. We're going to wrap it up here, I think. There's free webinars coming up there, HECRAS next week, the latest in HECRAS water modelling, and then there's a couple of courses coming up you can see further down. Don't forget the Smart Water Summit in 22nd, 23rd of March, and that'll be all the advertising I'm going to do for now, and we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks again, Bruce. Thanks, Jörg. Thanks, John, and everyone who attended. Appreciate your time and effort. Thank you. Bye for now.